What does a confident person look like? How would you like to be seen? How would you like to come across? Hey guys, and welcome to today's episode where I'd like us to have a conversation around the psychology of confidence, the psychology of self-esteem, and I'd like to leave you with 3 practical tips, as always, on how we can boost our self-confidence. So grab a coffee, grab your notebook, and let's get started. So, what is confidence to you? Okay, in the comments below, as always, let's take a moment just to look at where we are. What does a confident person look like? And remember, in previous videos we've been looking at the whole being. We said that there are 3 different types of characteristics of someone who has charisma. We've got presence, we've got warmth, and we've got power. So how do those link to confidence? How do they show up? Okay, if somebody has presence, how does that link to confidence? How does warmth link to confidence? And how does power link to confidence? So let's start off by having a conversation around, what is self-confidence? What is the psychology of confidence? Now, we know that a lack of confidence comes from, it can be biological. So you might be born with a certain imbalance in hormones, for example. So it could be to do with the balance of serotonin and dopamine, potentially. Those are our feel-good hormones, aren't they? It could be to do with the brain and the functioning of the brain. So yes, there is potentially a vulnerability there. It also could be because of experiences, and this is what we have been focusing a lot on, is your lack of confidence. Is that because you have had experiences in your life that have shifted you out of that? And we're going to look at that in videos to come, where we're going to be doing some practical work on really understanding where that trauma comes from. So confidence has to do with those 2. And then, of course, confidence also has to do with the choices that we make in the moment, the decisions that we make, how we choose to come across. So, self-confidence is linked to, of course, self-esteem, how we view ourselves, whether we see ourselves as successful or whether we see ourselves as not successful. And it has to do with imposter syndrome. Now we know that, one of the characteristics of low self-esteem is imposter syndrome. And we know, and we've said previously, that 65% of people have imposter syndrome. So the mind, let's take a moment just to discuss the mind, for example. So Buddhists believe that the ego automatically, what it does is it wants you to either be the best, so it wants you to have the best personality, the best house, the most success. So the ego is either thinking, I am the best, I want the best, I need the best, or the ego is thinking, you are the worst. So it's in the 2 extremes. It is, you are the worst, you have the worst, you're the worst self-esteem. So it wants to be the best, either the best of the best or the worst of the worst. So the ego is constantly in comparisons. Now, the thoughts that come from that space, remember we often speak about, and this is something that really transformed things for me, was when I started thinking and realizing that the thought is always looking at solving problems. So, to be the best of the best, what problem does it need to solve? Okay? To be the worst of the worst, what problem does it need to solve? So we're constantly in that space of void. Okay, I need to be more, I need to do more, I need to have more. So there is that void. So self-esteem, in terms of the mind and the ego, is based very much on what is missing and what needs to be solved in order to fill the void. Okay? Makes sense so far? So, imposter syndrome is very much linked around how you're in that space of void where you think that what you're doing is not enough, what you're doing is inadequate, but even deeper than that, it goes into who I am is inadequate. So take a moment just to reflect. Which areas in your life do you feel inadequate with? Now, feel free to share in the comments below or just to reflect quietly. Where do you feel not enough? Where do you feel inadequate? Now, when we feel inadequate, what's going to happen, of course, is we're going to feel stressed. It's going to cause anxiety. And that's going to create a cycle, isn't it? It's going to, the more you accept the inadequacy, the more you accept the fact that you potentially have an imposter syndrome. You think, okay, Katie Byron always talks about finding evidence. The brain, the mind is always going to find evidence for the self-truth that you told yourself. So if you think you're the best of the best, you might need to find evidence for that. The worst of the worst, I'm not good enough, I'm inadequate. Remember, if you say to yourself, I am inadequate, the brain is always going to the mind is always going to need to find evidence for that. It's going to try and solve the problem of inadequacy. So you think you're inadequate, okay, let me find evidence for your inadequacy. So the mind is always trying to find evidence, and it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where once you diagnose yourself as having imposter syndrome or a low self-esteem, the mind is always going to try and find evidence to support that. So the label in of itself is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, we've often spoken about once you label something, you attach a word and you attach a meaning. If you diagnose yourself as being an imposter, you won't like that. The mind doesn't like that. We, as human beings, don't like to attach those labels. So we begin to feel like we are a fraud. We begin to feel that we are a cheat. We begin to feel that we are deceiving people. And what is underneath that is that feeling of personal shame. We feel a sense of shame about who we are. And that's really what's the root, the deepest part of our lack of confidence, is that we, underneath it all, we think that we're not enough and we need to be ashamed of who we are, which is why we don't like putting ourselves out there, because we're scared that people will see that deep hurt, that deep insecurity. Now, this is linked to the brain. Now, there are, Stephan Vera talks a lot about self-confidence being linked to evolution. We had to be seen as the best of the best, which is why the mind always is one saying to be the best of the best. Because if you're not the best of the best, you might get kicked out of the tribe, and it's a sense of survival, isn't it? So you're going to die. Basically, that's what evolutional psychologists believe. So strength is really, really important. And we want to avoid embarrassment because all of that has to do with evolution. So there are a couple of decisions that make whenever we are faced with a trigger, whenever there is a perceived threat. The first decision that happens is psychological. It happens in your brain stem, okay? And the brain stem talks about a perceived threat. Is this situation safe, or do I need to get out of it? So when you are about to present yourself, whatever that looks like, the first thing that's going to happen is this safe for me? Is it safe for me to show up as who I am? Or is there a perceived threat of people's opinions of me? Is the threat that they are going to find out about who I am? And the second decision is in the midbrain, where we look at, okay, so is this person safe? Is this person above me or are they below me? Our brain is always wanting to find a sense of hierarchy. So maybe the self-esteem is linked to comparison, where you think, okay, I will never be as charismatic as that person, or this person will always be more confident than me, or I don't know as much as this person. So your self-esteem might be linked to the sense of hierarchy. So what do you think? Where is your self-esteem linked? Or is it a mixture of both? Because that does happen when it comes to us wanting, presenting ourselves. So, taking a moment to reflect. How do we begin to step out of that space? Today I'd like us to look at the concept of void and abundance as our solution. The first tip is, as always, to develop a curious mindset. Really looking at understanding or being curious about where things come from. Okay, so the first tip is to develop a curious mindset. Why does my brain think this way? Why do my thoughts think this way? Dr. Gabor Mate, we were speaking, I mentioned him before. He always talks about how at the heart of all of our self-esteem is a sense of trauma. And underneath each trauma is a sense of shame. And we don't want to be ashamed of who we are. No one should be ashamed of their self. So it's about beginning to shift that label of shame to curiosity. Instead of thinking, I am wrong, I am not enough, who I am is not enough, we begin to look at it from a space of curiosity. And one of the ways that the Buddhists do that is they often talk about this idea of identification. And at the root of a lack of self-esteem is you identifying with the trauma, you identifying with the perceived threat, you identifying with a perceived consequence in the future. So our self-esteem is based on the past trauma, the past experiences, or the perceived future. And it's very much about I, isn't it? The Buddhist and Gandhi says that you will find who you are, you will find yourself when you lose yourself in the service of others. So we're beginning to shift our mindset from the I to looking at how can I serve other people? How can my experience be used in the service of others? Instead of getting caught up, we begin to look at, okay, how is it that when I am presenting, how can I serve this other person? Because the mind wants to solve problems. So what if we shifted yes, we are curious and we want to discover and we identifying, where this trauma comes from. But once we've done that, we start to move into the space of abundance. How can I begin to serve other people? Move my identity from the I to the we, to the service of others. So stepping into a service mindset. When we begin to focus on spending time on the empathy of others, looking at our customers' pain, really looking at understanding people better. So if you're about to do a presentation or you're about to go into a sales meeting, what would shift if your awareness was not about the I and the lack of self-esteem and what they're going to think of, but to how you can serve the person that you are about to have the conversation with? What if it became more about, okay, I want Buddhists also believe that you have full control over the preparation that you have before a meeting, the process and the practice. So for me, if we're looking at it like that, life becomes more about the experience of living life. We learn. So each time I do a video or each time I create a program, the preparation and the process and the practice of that experience itself teaches me about who I am, gives me an opportunity to learn, be different aspects of myself so that I can learn how to be the best version of myself. So stepping back into that space of how am I learning? What is the gift of each of these different experiences? So we're moving from the I into the service of others. What is the gift of the process of learning is tip number 2. Tip number 1 is stepping into observer consciousness, being curious. Tip number 2 is what is the gift of the process. And when you're stepping into the gift of the process, tip number 3 becomes all about quiet confidence. Quiet confidence is really when you are in the abundance of the present moment. You see the gift in the present moment. You see what you have in the present moment versus what you don't have. You see what the gift is that you are sharing with other people. You see in the very simple things the gift of the breath of life, the gift of the fact that you have a roof over your head, that you have a job, that you have the gift of being able to do a presentation. You see the evidence of where you do have skills and you trust in those skills. It becomes more about how I can grow and how I can contribute. So a couple of tips there today. Today's tips are, number 1, step into the space of the curious mindset, exploring and being curious. Number 2, look at the gift of the process of learning itself. And number 3, be in the abundance of the moment. So the exercises I'm inviting you to do today is to use those 3 when you are about to do a presentation. Okay, so curious mindset. Let your mind drop down into your stomach and just lean into the discomfort without judging it, without being attached to it, but lean into the discomfort of your self-esteem, being curious about where it comes from rather than being attached to it as your self-esteem. So that's the first exercise. Second exercise is really to look at the inner monologue. Okay, what is that inner monologue that I'm experiencing at the moment, that I'm thinking at the moment? How can I shift that inner monologue to a gift? Okay, what is it that I'm learning from this experience? And then looking at, of course, the abundance. What is it that I have in this present moment? So today we've looked at the psychology of confidence, and we've looked at 3 tips and 3 exercises that I hope will help you on your journey to boosting your self-confidence. In the comments below, please do share what would you like to learn more about from this challenge, from these videos. What's still missing? Okay, what's still missing? That's abundance. That's lack of abundance, isn't it? So maybe my question is, what is abundant now? What have you learned? And also, what would you like to learn more of so that you can be a fuller expression of yourself? All right. I look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you in our next video. Mwah. See you soon. Cheers, guys.